I think the people most without fear on September 12th in America were those working at Ground Zero. They were in the greatest danger, actually, but because they were active, they were engaged. The firemen and the medical officials and the cops who were working there, first to find victims, then to find remains and clear the site. They had a civic task. They were engaged and they weren't afraid of anything. American citizens after 9/11 said to the president, what can we do? What can we do to become engaged and take some responsibility? President Bush unfortunately said, go shopping. Go back to the mall. Go back to your normal lives. We'll take care of it. Spectatorship is an invitation to fear. Citizenship is how we fight the politics of fear. The politics of citizenship, the politics of engagement, taking responsibility is a much better way to deal with terrorism than hunkering down, being spectators, and allowing the government to rob us of our liberties, to rob us of our multiculturalism in the name of protecting us.
He was a young American who went to Iraq hoping to make a difference. And when this Navy vet saw what he believed was evidence of illegal arms dealing, he called the FBI.
So why did he end up in a secret U.S. military prison treated, he says, like a terrorist?
He treated me like a terrorist.
Even though you're an American citizen?
Yes.
It all started in the summer of 2005 when Vance went to Baghdad. Born and bred in Chicago, Vance had joined the Navy after high school and later worked in security. 2 years ago, he took a job with an Iraqi company, Shield Group Security, or SGS, which provides protection for businesses and organizations. Vance supervised security and logistics operations. Before long, he says he started noticing troubling things at the company, explosives and huge stockpiles of ammunition and weapons, including anti-aircraft guns. He worried they were going to militias involved in sectarian violence. You became an informant, a snitch.
Yes.
Why?
It's just the right thing to do.
Isn't that risky?
Oh, yeah.
The two men say they and other employees who were Westerners were taken to the U.S. Embassy and debriefed. Their ordeal was just beginning.
There's soldiers with shackles in their hands and goggles and zip ties, and you just knew something was terribly going wrong.
Vance and Ertel were eventually taken to Camp Crawford, a secret U.S. military prison near the Baghdad airport. It once held Saddam Hussein and now houses some of the most dangerous insurgents in all of Iraq. Here's what Vance and Ertel say happened in that prison. They were strip-searched and each put in solitary confinement in tiny cold cells. They were deliberately deprived of sleep with blaring music and bright lights. They were hooded and cuffed whenever moved. And although they were never physically tortured, there was always that threat.
The guards employ what I would like to call as verbal kung fu. It's do as we say or we will use excessive violence on you.
You're a security detainee,
Yes,
just like an insurgent.
absolutely.
How were you treated?
Like an insurgent.
A military panel which reviews charges against detainees eventually questioned Vance and Ertel. Both men were given a document that said, you do not have the right to legal counsel. The men say they could not see all the evidence against them and did not have the legal protections typically afforded Americans. The military now acknowledges that it took 3 weeks just to contact the FBI to confirm Vance was an informant. But even after that, Vance was held another 2 months. In all, he was imprisoned for 97 days before being cleared of any wrongdoing and released.
I look like hell. You're completely emaciated, beard, shaggy, dirty. They showered me, shaved me, cleaned me up, and dumped me at Baghdad International Airport like it never happened.
The U.S. military says it thought you were helping the insurgents. Isn't that a reasonable basis to hold you and interrogate you?
They could have investigated the true facts, found out exactly what was happening. What doesn't need to happen is throw people in a cell, we'll figure out the answers later. It's not the way to do things.
Why should the American people care about how you were treated?
This is just another step of our Constitution slowly being whittled away. It's basic fundamental rights of our founding fathers.
The loss of civil liberties, the lack of trust in government because they don't tell the truth, these are outrageous and unpleasant political developments, but they don't necessarily spell the end of the United States. Financial bankruptcy does.
To maintain the Bush administration's war doctrine, massive increases in military spending have been required. The United States now spends more than $400 billion annually on the military, 7 times as much as the next biggest spender, and nearly equal to what the rest of the world spends combined. Such vast expenditures on military machinery and war, together with the largest tax cuts in history, have driven the Bush administration's record budget deficits. They have also been responsible for deepening the national debt, which by the end of 2004 figures to stand at over $7 trillion, more than 3 times the size of the debt of the entire Third World. Foreign countries hold the notes on about 1/3 of this unprecedented U.S. debt.
That money must be paid back. And that means somewhere down the road, Americans will pay taxes and get nothing.
Debt is reaching forward to future generations, taking their wealth, bringing it onto current account, and spending it.
If all tax cuts that were enacted in 2001 and 2003 are made permanent, and if discretionary spending, which is national defense, homeland security, judicial system, education, the environment, the nation's transportation infrastructure system, etc., if that grows by the rate of the economy over the next 10 years and over the long term, then it means that we face large and growing structural deficits such that by year 2040, we can do little more than pay interest on the massive and growing federal debt. That is obviously unacceptable. Even if all the tax cuts are not extended in whole or in part, even if we don't fix the alternative minimum tax, even if no new laws are passed that would serve to increase expenditures or reduce revenues, and even if we're able to constrain discretionary spending for the next 10 years to the rate of inflation, which we haven't for a long time, we still face large and growing structural deficits in the years ahead. Bottom line, the status quo is unacceptable and unsustainable. We're on an imprudent and unsustainable fiscal path. Tough choices are required. We will not be able to grow our way out of this problem. Anybody who says that suffers from 2 problems. Number 1, they have not studied economic history adequately. And number 2, they probably wouldn't do real well at math because the numbers just don't add up. So what do we need to do?
Well, certainly the Republican leadership in the last 6, 8, even 10 years, and especially in these last 6 years, we have been the big party, a big spender party. We have spent more money on subsidies than ever before. We've doubled the size of the Department of Education. We brought in one of the biggest new entitlement programs, the prescription drug programs, big, huge highway expenditures. So I would say that in some ways, yes, they have some differences, but in other ways, I think Republicans have grown to act just like Democrats. Mm-hmm. In the foreign policy, certainly we can't afford $700 billion in protecting an empire. That has to come to an end because the truth is we're flat out broke and we have to borrow every single penny to fight that war from the Chinese.
Yeah. There's a lot of examples where you have runaway inflation, prices are soaring, and the economy is in shambles. And that is what I fear will come to this country if we don't quit printing the money and creating credit, whether it's to fight wars that we shouldn't be fighting or to bail everybody out in this country that needs something. And that's the way this place operates. And therefore they go along with the system, and I think subtly they sort of like it. They like it because I don't have to raise taxes, and somehow or another these bills get paid.
Conditions, I don't think this country can do well borrowing nearly $3 billion a day from places like Japan and China to service our account deficit. And we're leaving a $60 trillion obligation to the next generation. So this country's in serious financial trouble, and besides, although the market today was excited about good news on inflation, I saw some bad news in that. I mean, 5% inflation rate, and that's probably less than 2% or so of what's really happening. The American people are sick and tired of inflation. When you have to borrow, my personal finances would be very good if I borrowed $1 million every month, but someday the bills will become due.